Now let's start looking at using some logical functions, and slowly we'll move on to the lookups. So for that, some of the queries which I would like to create, like classify a record as excellent if daily return is greater than 5%, good 2 to 5%, okay -2 to 2%, bad -5 to -2%, and worse probably less than -5%. So here I am more looking at classifying the data, right, based on so it's not, it's like for every record next to that I have to write it as good, okay, something like that. This is like one based on one parameter we are classifying the data, daily return. Based on one parameter we are classifying the data. Sometimes we can have multiple parameters for classifying the data, like classify a record as extraordinary if turnover greater than, let's say, 40,000, and probably the daily return greater than 5%. In that case you treat that record as, so which means actually the term extraordinary is coming only when both these conditions are met, else classify it as normal. So here actually the classification is getting done not on one parameter but on more than one parameter, joined with an and condition between them. In some cases what can happen is they can be joined with an or condition also. Either this is met or this is met. Like either, so probably in the same example, if I take classify a record as extraordinary, if either turnover is greater than 40,000 or the daily return is greater than 5, even if any one of the two conditions is satisfied, then I have to classify it as extraordinary. So these are the three major kind of queries we should try to look at, right? So one is only on one parameter, two, the two parameters are joined by and, three, the two parameters are joined by or, right? So the typical classifications in our daily life also as a part of logical operations, and, or, and if. These are the three typical functions: if, and or. The three major functions that come into this category. So in the first one we'll use only if, whereas in the second and the third is nothing but replacing and with or. So in those cases we'll use if along with and or, right? So let's start looking at the using of these functions. Now the way if as a function exists, if actually contains three parameters. One is the logical condition. The first input, when you open that fx box, the first input which you have to give is the logical condition. So the output of this calculation of this logical condition should always come out as either true or false. No other calculation. The output should be coming out as true or false. So my questions could be like, my condition could be, is this value greater than 5%? The answer will be either true or false. So those kind of things should be given as input. The calculation should come out as true or false. Now the second parameter I have to give is, in case it is true, value to be displayed. Value or calculation to be displayed. And in case it is false, the value to be displayed. This is what is the structure of an if. Right? So we going back to our of this example, I have to do the same kind of a stuff. The way I will like to handle the same thing is, I'll start off like this. In if, I'll first put any particular value, like today's daily return or 4th November's daily return. Is it greater than 5%? I'll get either yes or no. Then if it is yes, I will write it as excellent. If it is no, I have to do one more test. So again I'll use one more if, where this time I'll put, is it greater than 2%? Because I want to check 2 to 5%. I don't need to check 2 to 5 now, because above 5 it's not there. So I am checking for above 2. If it is true, it means it is lying between 2 and 5 itself. It's not above 5, but it is above 2. So here I can very well put out good. Then again I can do one more if it is not the case. Right? If it is not greater than 2%, I can do one more if. So what is happening is, in this process, if is getting inside if is getting inside if, to create your logic. Because any if formula, it takes only 3 inputs. First one should be a condition. The second one should be what value you want to display in case true, in case the first one gives true. And the third one says, in case the first one gives false, what value you would like to display. Right? So we'll see, once we execute it, we'll get a clarity on the usage of it. So let me put some additional columns. So I'll say if. I'll use a simple if function. Shift F3. Now, as we discussed, these are the 3 inputs which it is looking out for. The logical condition. So what I'll check in the logical condition is the daily return. The return, is it greater than 5%? See, because I'll have to drag this formula down, I don't want to look at what is the number that is existing there. Right? Because if I drag it down, the second cell, third cell, fourth cell, fifth cell, all these cells. So I'll take it as a variable. So I don't actually look at what is the number here. Right? Whatever is the number, it could be -2, it could be +2, it could be +10. Whatever is the number, the first thing we are doing is it greater than 5%? If it is greater than 5%, we will write it as excellent. If it is not, we have to do that whole series of activities, check for greater than 2% and so on. So before we go with that entire process, just to break it, I'll put some x just to come out, just to finish this and start another fresh if, because I have to do one more checking of whether it is greater than 2% or greater than minus 2%, a series of stuff. So just to execute the second one, I am breaking it in the middle by putting some x, some temporary value, which I am not interested. But I can't write the formula such a big, so many ifs one after the other until I get that comfort level. Right? I typically the formula will go like see here. I'll first check for greater than 5%. So it will give answer either as yes or no. If yes comes out, then I'll write it as excellent. If no comes out, then again I'll check for greater than 2%, which means another if condition has to be written. Again this will give yes or a no. If this gives yes, I can write it as good, because greater than 2 but not greater than 5, which is lying between 2 to 5. Whereas if this gives no, again I'll have to test for greater than minus 2%. Like that I have to go. Now this was my logical condition. This is what we have written in the if yes block. In the no block, actually I have to write this entire story, because if it is giving false, I have to do this entire thing. So just because I have to do this entire thing, I'm just pausing it with some x. I'll replace that x with this entire stuff again in a step by step manner. All right. So now what happens, you see here you will get an x, because it's not greater than 5%. Whichever is not greater than 5%, you will get x. Wherever it is greater than 5%, you will get it as excellent. This you are getting as excellent because 6.98%. But for all others, it is coming as x. But that is not our requirement. X is only our temporary stuff. So in place of x, I'll write the second rule now. So what I'll do is I'll get into the formula. Wherever the x was there, I delete this x. Only that x part in the formula, along with the quotes. Including the quotes, I'll delete it. I'll write another if statement. Now do a shift F3. I'll do another if where I'll get a fresh block. In that block, this time I'll write the daily returns. Is it greater than 2%? If it is greater than 2%, I'll write it as good. Otherwise, again I have to do for greater than minus 2%. Right? So before I do that, I'll put an x again, a temporary stuff. So it adjusts the brackets and all that stuff. So you simply say yes to it. There is a message saying brackets are not matching, so it is automatically adjusting the brackets. So you simply say yes to it. Now when I drag it, we will see there are some goods, there are some excellents. Good is between 2 to 5, because this is 3.35, it is showing good. This is 4.41, it is showing good. Rest all are shown with excess still. Right? Probably the same logic now you execute. Instead of x, now you check for greater than minus 2%. If shift F3, the daily return greater than minus 2%. If it is greater, write it as OK. Otherwise, still write it as x, because you still need to check for minus 5. I'll write another bracket adjustment. So we are getting some days of OK, some x's and some goods and excellent, but X is still not the required behavior. So again I'll go and eliminate. So now you see this formula is growing bigger and bigger. Right? We'll write one more. This time is the daily return greater than minus 5%. Then we'll say bad. Now I don't need any more. I mean anything that is not falling into all these four is worse. So here in the false block I'll simply write it as worst. Because there is no more checking. All checkings are done. So now I can drag it. Now I should get the output more like this. So there are some okays, there are some bads, there are some goods, excellents, and probably there should be some worse. There should be some worse, at least on some days for some companies. Sorry. Okay, let's. Here there are 2 3 words. Yeah, minus 5.37. It's less than minus 5%, or probably minus 5.69. So these are all less than minus 5%. So that's the days where the worst is coming out. So now probably if required you can even go with some kind of conditional formatting kind of stuff and all those things also. All excellents mark it with some color. All goods mark it with some other color. Right? Probably I may say to attract it. All excellents highlight cells where the text contains are probably equal to. If the cell value is equal to excellent, highlight with some color. So at least visually quickly you can make out. So presentation looks more and more better. And if we see the formula is also a lengthy formula. So many ifs are used inside ifs. Right? It's typically a nested if inside if, and almost all the results are coming out. And probably you can do count ifs. How many okays are there? How many bads are there? You can do count ifs, or probably company wise you can do count ifs. Right? Probably let's say how many bads are there for, how many excellent days are there for ICICI Bank. Right? Probably I can put ICICI Bank and excellent. I can do count ifs. No, that's how we use multiple formulas as a part of our practice exercise. Okay, how many are there? Criteria range 1 is, let's say, M column, excellent, and range 2 is symbol ICICI Bank. So there are 7 excellents for ICICI Bank. And how many such for S Bank? Only 6. So probably I can do this kind of analysis. HDFC Bank only 1 excellent. So it did not grow more than 5% on a single day. So you can really make out these kind of stuff. Probably Canara Bank has grown 8 days. Or if I want, let's say, worst, 5 days. So such kind of analysis can clearly be made out once we are computing. So because one more new column got added for us, I can do any other kind of sum ifs, average ifs based on that criteria. Right? All right. So that's a plain if. Now, with this if, the bad side is here. There are 5 conditions for us. Right? 5 conditions. Like I mean 5 different values. Excellent, good, okay, bad, worst. For 5 different values, we have to do 4 ifs, because for the last one we don't need to check anymore. The remaining all we are put into worst. So that's the reason we always end up with 1 less than the number of output. So let's say if I need 10 different values to be displayed, not just 5, probably grading A plus A minus B plus B, something like that. If I have to grade, then there are 9 ifs I have to write if there are 10 grades. And here it is nothing but it's a simple classification of the data. If we say, or probably grouping of data, all data that is lying between 5% to probably 10% or something, 5% and above, group them as one group and give that group an alias called excellent. That's what has happened in this process. Similarly for yes, anything that is lying between 2% to 5%, group it as good. So this is nothing but it's an aliasing. You give a simple, you group the data and give one value, one name to that data, right? So in that cases, if there are 10 such names, 9 ifs, it becomes very lengthy formula without too much of value addition. The reason being there are much better ways of writing that similar situation, especially when I have to group the data and just give a name to that. There are many other ways of writing it. But and for that matter, even 2003 and before versions of Excel, it did not even allow more than 6 ifs to be nested within each other. The reason being, if is actually a costly operation. Costly in terms memory usage wise. So and that too, if I write one if and I drag it so many times, it's like that if as a formula is being used so many times. Dragging is nothing but the copy, right? So if there are 3000 lines, there are 3000 if formulas, and each if formula based on the algorithm, the computer algorithm, the computer processing mechanism of if formula, it takes slightly more time than other formulas in terms of pulling out the values. It uses a search mechanism called binary search. If this is true, this is the value, otherwise this is it. So again, algorithmic wise, it takes slightly more time compared to the other mechanisms. So 2003 and earlier did not even support more than 6. The moment you had 7 ifs in your formula, it never used to give the answer also. But in 2007 and later versions, they have improved a lot on it. They have improvised a lot on it, and they did not put much of restrictions on the number of ifs right now. But still, if this is the objective, group it and just give a name to it. Though you can use if, there are various other mechanisms like lookups which can simplify that process. Then when should I use if for the same logical stuff? One, when the output is just not an aliasing but some calculation. For example, sales commission. If sales is greater than 10 lakhs, your commission will be 5,000 plus 5% of the sales. If your sales is more than 5 lakhs, 5 to 10 lakhs, your commission will be 2,000 plus 3% of the sales. You have such kind of calculations for different groups. Yeah, some calculation. Need not be integer. Any not just not just the same name for everything. In this case, we have given OK for all the ones which fall in that group. Instead of that, probably even in this OK itself, like OK1, OK2, OK3, OK4, where some calculation is there, which is not a unique value for all, right? If such kind of variation is there, then there is no other alternative. I have to use if itself. But if it is a simple straightforward aliasing, then I can do the same flavor with lookups more effectively than with ifs. Right? So because in this case it's pure aliasing. Whereas if I say, probably instead of simply saying okay, if I say the date is okay. Date means that variable date 4/11/2011 is okay. If that's the case, it's just not okay. It's something more than that. And it's a kind of calculation. Calculation doesn't mean only a numerical calculation. Anything dynamic. Which means it's not the same stuff for all the values. Here we are having the same stuff for all of them. So whenever we have the same stuff for all, better not go with if, use lookups. When we do the lookups, we'll take the same example and execute the same thing using lookups. Right? Then, so that is one case where if is used, especially when you have the output which is not same, which changes from record to record at least by some extent. Even like OK1, OK2, OK3 itself is fine for me. Then also if is better. But if it is only OK, 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 OK to be displayed for all the things that are falling in that group, right? Probably if I say OK and in the bracket I write the percentage, then also I can use if. But if it is just OK writing, then it's better not to use if. The second condition is if the input is criteria is multiple criteria, like our second and third questions, right? Both the daily returns greater than something and even the turnover greater than something. So two conditions or more than one condition joined by and or, then if is worth using, because lookups will not address those kind of situations. So I have to go with if itself. So if is still a powerful feature, but if I use it especially for these kind of stuff where it is not required, it is unnecessarily increasing one, the size of my Excel sheet, and two, the time it takes for processing. Sometimes when we open the Excel sheet, it takes too much of time to load. The more and more the ifs are there, of course other formulas are also memory consuming, but if is more memory consuming compared to the other ones. So that's where especially when the formulas are too many, people prefer using VBAs and macros, because there is another mechanism of where you can avoid these many formulas on the Excel sheet. So the same thing when you write through VBAs and macros, probably a 100 MB file may or a 5 MB file may come out to 1 MB itself. So that's kind of sophistication you are trying to build in. Alright, so let's look at the second query before we use lookups for this. Let's complete the if parts or the logical parts. The second query is classify a record as extraordinary if turnover is greater than 40,000 and daily return is greater than 5%. Both conditions have to be met. So when both the conditions have to be met, I'll have to use and. Both or any, even if 5 are there, all 5 conditions have to be met. Right? Then I'll use and. Even if any one condition has to be met, at least one condition needs to be met, then I'll use or. So these and or, what happens is these formulas will return only true or false as the output. If all conditions are met, then it will give true, otherwise it will give false. And or wise, even if one condition is satisfied, it will give true. If only all conditions are not satisfied, then only it will give false. So we'll try to execute the true and false here. So I'll say and I'll use or, both of them parallelly. So here I'll use a simple and function. shift F3. There are two rules. So it asks for different rules. Logical 1, logical 2, logical 3 are all. Each one is a rule. So what is my first rule? Turnover greater than 40,000. Okay, where is the turnover data here? Turnover is this one. This value greater than 40,000. That's the first rule. The second rule for me is daily return greater than 5%. Daily return is this one. Greater than 5%. These are the two rules. If both these rules are met, then only the AND will give me true. Even if one of the rule is not met, it will give me false. So let's see this. It has given me false because either one or both the rules are not getting met. Now let's drag it. Here there is a true. The reason being turnover is greater than 40,000 and even the daily return is more than 5%. Both the rules are getting satisfied. So whereas all excellents need not, here also it is fine. I think on almost all the excellent days are above 40,000 itself. Alright, here you see this is coming out as false, 283rd record, because on that day the turnover is only 15,000. 15,000, but this is 5.13. So this is giving still as false. So when we are pulling, joining the conditions using AND, it will retrieve true only when all the conditions are satisfied. Even if one of them is violated, it will give false. Whereas when I am doing OR, even if one of them is satisfied, right, the same input you give in case of OR, the turnover greater than 40,000 and daily return greater than 5%. Both rules, it is giving false means both the rules are not met. Even if one of the rule is satisfied, we'll get trues. You see, these are all trues because at least one of the rule is getting met. Turnover rules are getting met here. Turnover is greater than 40,000. So that's the reason why these values are showing as true. Right? So or see, there are so many cases in a business scenarios also, especially like okay, recruitment criteria. Either you are a graduate with 5 years of experience or postgraduate with 1 year of experience. Both are eligible. So any one of the conditions only has to be met. Of course, if both are met, you are still shortlisted. Even if one of the conditions is met, you are still shortlisted. So these kind of business scenarios will require the usage of OR, even if one condition is satisfied. Whereas when all conditions have to be satisfied, then I will go with AND. But my requirement here is what? It's not just classifying them as true or false. Right? It is classifying them as extraordinary and normal. So wherever it is true, I want to write extraordinary. Wherever it is false, I want to write it as normal. Now, how do I go with that? There are multiple ways. Wherever it is true, I want to write extraordinary. Wherever it is false, I want to write it normal. Now, which means it's better to go with if formula now. If, because it's more like two different conditions. Two different conditions. If that entire thing is evaluated to true, in the value if true block, write it as extraordinary. Value if false block, write it as normal. right? So just I'm coming out with that. So if I say if equal to if, what is the test? The first thing should evaluate to true or false, correct? This is already evaluated to true or false. So I'll directly give this value because this is already evaluated. When we said logical condition, whatever we give inside it, the output of it should come to true or false. This is already false. So it is evaluated to false already. So if I give that, so value if true, what should I write if it is true? I'll write it as extraordinary. If that value comes out to true, I'll write it as extraordinary. If it comes out to false, I'll write it as normal. So this day is written as normal. Drag it down. This is written as extraordinary. Wherever there is true, it is written as extraordinaries, and wherever there is false, it is written as normal. Now, the same thing you can do with OR. Right? The same thing, instead of giving this in the first field, you give this in the first field. So probably if I edit this, instead of N2, I give O2. Then drag it. These are all extraordinaries. Wherever truths are there, they all come out as extraordinaries. Wherever falses are there, they are showing as normal. Right? Now, one more important aspect here is, see, I require this P column as my output, but I don't require this O column. O is intermediate, right? What is my requirement? Classify a record as extraordinary if the turnover is greater than 40,000 or daily return is greater than 5%. So P column is really making sense for me because that is how I have classified. But O column is more like an intermediate calculation for me now. Right? I really don't require it. This is not my output anymore. It's an intermediate calculation. Sometimes what happens is the more and more intermediate calculations I have, again this is not mandatory. The moment, I mean only in case I want to keep my sheet only to the required. Instead of cluttering it with so many columns and rows which are intermediate calculations, if I want to keep only the ones that are necessary, right? One way is if I delete this O column, I'll get a reference error. Because there is a form, no, the dependency is this one is dependent on this one. Because in the input of this we are using O2. So because we are using O2 in the formula, there is, if O2 is deleted, then the whole values of P also will have a problem. But still I don't want this O column. Right? If you do hiding, it still exists. It still exists and it creates some other problems later. Right? From a presentation standpoint, yes, you can hide it. But from the memory standpoint or calculation standpoint, the value still exists within the system. So one more aspect which people look at is eliminate this intermediate variable. How do I eliminate? Look at your final variable. This is your final output. What all inputs it is taking? Only O2. Apart from that, everything is text. Only O2 is the input. What you do is check out if O2 is actually a formula or a value. If it is a formula, copy this formula in the formula bar level. Copy the formula there at the formula bar level, Control C, escape, come to this, instead of O2, paste that formula. Right? Now you drag it. You'll get the same output. But the only thing is, now it is no more. Look at this formula now. The dependency is on F2 and G2. Right? F2 and G2 are actually your data. G2 is your daily return and F2 is probably turnover. These two are your input data itself. So there is no other intermediate stuff. Now I can very well delete this O column without any issue. Because now O2 is, now that P column is no more dependent on O column. All we have done is, wherever there is a dependency, go to each and every element. This is how people write longer formulas. Just giving you the flavor of how to write a longer. Probably I cannot visualize a 10-line formula in one single step. What I typically think of doing is, do it in parts. Just like the way we have done the if also, with some excess and all in the middle. Do it in parts. So as per logic, what is it? Okay, first see, if something is, if two conditions are met, I have to treat it as extraordinary, otherwise normal. So first step, check for both the conditions. Then use the output of that as an input of if. So what is happening? There are two stages in the question. But the output of the second stage, first stage is used as the input of the second stage. But the output of the first stage is no need to be displayed because I cannot visualize the entire formula in one single go. I have broken it into two parts and I started visualizing it. But it can very well happen that I can put it in one single go itself. Probably if I had written it in one single go, my formula would have been like this. If R of F2 greater than 40,000, G2 greater than 55%, extraordinary, normal. This is one single line writing of the formula. Until we get a hold on it, we'll do it step by step. Or probably it's not about getting a hold on it also. Sometimes even a very expert person cannot visualize a formula which uses 10 different formulas inside. Better to break it, write it step by step, see the output at every stage and keep integrating it, keep expanding it. So that's what we have done here also, right? So in this case, even if intermediate is not there, it can still solve the problem for us, right? So any formula you want to make bigger and bigger, you don't need to visualize in one single step. That's somewhere people make the most common mistake, right? Sometimes there are some error handling processes. If these errors kind of stuff have to be used. Even in those kind of cases, it's not worth remembering the whole row. Rather than that, if I start doing it in bits and pieces, in chunks, I can integrate the formula much easily because as I discussed, formula is a simple building block. Now, it all depends on the engineer, how he assembles all those blocks to create the best output out of it. The same blocks can be made in different ways to create different outputs. Now, when we say we are becoming more and more powerful users in Excel, I need to know how I join all these pieces, how to join all these blocks, or which block to use in which case, what output the first block gives, how do I send it. Here if we see, first we have used AND. We know that AND gives an output of true or false. But in if also, the first field is true or false. So which means I can link these two. I can link the output of AND with the first field of if. So a new block is coming out. AND and if put together, or OR and if put together. And that is what is the outputs which we have created here. So, there is no one single formula. If I mug up these 100 or 200 formulas, that's what is of Excel. It's not the case. Majorly, it's more of analytics. To what extent I am analytical about the data. So conceptually you need to know what I want to do. Then you frame what algorithm. What is the process flow? Then you see which formulas can be used in this case. Because no one single formula, even for the age. We did not have one single formula. We have used date diff 3 times. Because Excel cannot, Excel is not visualizing from the perspective of every requirement. What it simply thinks is, okay, do we have anything with us which can give this output? Either in a long way or in a short way. If there is one, over. Because every business requirement cannot be understood. Probably an accountant will say, I should have something which calculates the profit for me. I'll simply give all my selling expenses, depreciations, and all that stuff as input. It should calculate what is my profit. Obviously, Excel probably all that is some pluses and some minuses. You need to know the business part of what plus, what minus you have to do. Then it can compute it. But if I say no, I want the formula directly for profit equal to profit, and I give some inputs into it, it calculates the profit and gives. Probably if that is your requirement, you can write your macro, your own formula code and use it. But Excel, it gives it as blocks. Okay, with some pluses. If this person knows business, he should be able to get the output by using some pluses and some minuses. So every formula of Excel is designed more from that perspective. Multi-usage. I cannot, if I say profit, it can work only in that example. It is not a generic one. But if I write something for pluses and minuses, probably in all businesses I can use that. So Excel more targets at that mini building block level rather than at an aggregated level. Right? How I put now, if it is giving and or, multi-usages across multiple businesses. Now I should know how do I link them the moment I know what is the input and output of each of these. So the basic thing is, on any data you have, you don't need a separate data set to practice all this. Any data of your company, whatever you have, you come across, you can try to apply almost every formula on the top of that. As long as it is having some numbers, some dates, some text, you can practice anything on the top of that. Right?